I used to have my favorite humility joke of all time. It doesn't really play well in Methodist circles because the Methodists, strangely enough, have a really good sense of humor. But you need a good Lutheran crowd to have that because they don't have the same sense of humor. But I would go into a pastor's meeting and say, whenever humility came up, I'd go, humility? I'm great at that. I'm the best at that. I won an award for that. Which would invariably get somebody who goes, well, that doesn't sound very humble to me. And I'm like, yeah, because it might have been a joke. I'm going to let you in today behind the curtain into the space of spiritual depth that is the leaders, the staff of this congregation, and how they work together. This past Wednesday was National Boss Day. And at 8:30 in the morning, Grant sent me a text which read, Happy National Boss Day. In parentheses, look it up. Now I am 100% secure as Employee of the Month with a couple of laughing emojis. It was a funny text. It was a nice text, but Grant decided, in all his wisdom, to send the text proclaiming himself Employee of the Month to the entire staff. So I responded, I said, thank you for turning a blessing into a staff conflict on National Boss Day. Never to be outdone, Lindsay quickly replied, Grant, you've really highlighted the continuum that Eric has to deal with. You wished him a happy Boss's Day, and yesterday, I suggested we switch places for Boss's Day so he can understand what I go through in having him as my boss. I guess we express our appreciation in different ways. Also, you were Employee of the Month last month. Not that I'm keeping track. So later in that day, we had a staff meeting, and the staff gave me a gift of my 3 favorite food groups. Grapefruit, Cheetos, and Tootsie Rolls. Now you would sit there and think, wow, giving them Tootsie Rolls, what a nice thing. But I think it might have been the first year that Lindsay was here, I suggested we have, a healthy alternative or a collective alternative for kids was maybe getting them Tootsie Rolls to eat. And she just looks at me and goes, Tootsie Rolls? No one under the age of 60 likes Tootsie Rolls. So this is my life, and this is the behavior. It's not something, this kind of behavior among staff, it's not something that started at Advent. It is a trend that has followed me my entire career. About 8 months into her ministry here, Lindsay shared with me, she goes, wow, you're the first pastor I've worked for that I've been allowed to make fun of. To which I responded, I'm not sure I allow it. You just do it, and I don't get mad. Many people will see my humor as contradictory to mature faith, but I see it as an intimate expression of my trust in, my relationship with God and the world. Consider for a moment Psalm 126, which begins, when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who are dreaming. Then our mouths were filled with laughter and our tongues with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Laughter, joy, and rejoicing are not restrained activities. We need to practice them. It helps us show signs of gratitude. And how will we ever associate those activities with God if we never experience them in the church? To me, my humor is an expression of my humility. And until you know me, most people don't really understand that. The journey, this is actually, just so you know, point of reference, because I realize my hair is a different color now. But that is my being installed as a camp director at Camp Shalom. The first person on the left is the bishop of the Lutheran Church, and the second person is the bishop of the Catholic Church. It was the first time the Lutheran Church and Catholic Church in Iowa had ever done anything officially together. Big moment, and I was given that this not too long ago. The journey to become an ordained pastor is more extensive than most people realize, or at least it was for me. You need to go through a series of psychological evaluations and assessment that take over a year. In the ELCA, you then meet with a candidacy committee, which in my case was about 15 people, who would spend a year determining whether you were pastor material or not. And once you were approved to enter seminary, you meet the candidacy committee every year, and they decide whether you can continue to move on your course of study. And this is more than an academic assessment. It is a nerve-wracking experience for all candidates, but when, in my case, you quit your job and to become a full-time student, you move your family from New York to Iowa, you have 2 small children, 1 and 3 years old, and you're living on $8,000 a year, those decisions carry a higher level of anxiety. At the end of my second year, Reverend Gene Handwerk came out to Iowa to meet with me as my candidacy committee representative to assess my ability to move on. He came out to Wartburg Seminary in Iowa, and I was glad it was him because he was the kind of pastor you would just love to have serving your church. He was calm, he was quiet, he was reserved, he was able to laugh, and he carried a genuine pastoral presence with him. And he was the epitome of what we would think of when we hear one who walked humbly with God. So near the end of my interview, Pastor Handwerk Gene looked at me and said something I've carried with me all these years. He said, "Eric, when I first met you, I thought you were the most narcissistic human being I've ever met. And now that I've gotten to know you, not only is that not true, but you are the exact opposite. And that's going to be a problem for you in your ministry." I gotta be honest, the comment caught me off guard, and I tried desperately to remember what narcissistic meant. But I knew it wasn't good. So I responded the way that I respond to those kind of things. Some people would take it seriously. Some people, like me, would throw in a joke. So I took a snarky line from a Woody Harrelson movie as my response. I said to him, "You know what Jesus said about that?" Gene looked at me and said, "No." I said, "He's against it." He just looked at me, "What are you talking about?" Gene was not buying the joke, and he wanted an authentic response from me. And I told him, "Isn't judging someone on their outward appearance, on a first impression, a contradiction to the gospel?" I mean, Jesus looks at a leper and does not see a leper, but sees a child of God. The world looked at the poor, the blind, the divorced, the sick, and saw something, and they saw something less, but Jesus saw something more. And all those people, I think, we're compelled to always look beyond our first impression of anyone to see who people really are. He looked at me. I know he liked my answer. He agreed with me, and he said, "Yes, but congregations don't always see it that way." Gene was worried people would judge me before they got to know me, and this judgment would cause extra stress on my leadership and my ministry. And it was amazing as I look back, he was right. And at the time, I didn't know how right he was, but his words have stayed with me ever since. The problem was, Gene was asking me to change who I fundamentally was, who I am, to be more acceptable to others. And while there was absolutely no malice in his words, he did not have anything but deep pastoral care for me. If I listened to him and did what he said, I had to buy into that who I am is neither good nor acceptable to God. After seminary, Gene Hanwerk became my mentor and a colleague, and I served in Northeast Pennsylvania, and my relationship with him was one of the most deepest treasures of my life. He passed on a Pennsylvania Dutch Moravian humility to me, and I made him laugh more than any other pastor under his supervision. Yesterday, in thinking, as I was putting the sermon together, I was thinking of Gene, and I just kind of lost touch with him, so I did an internet search to see where he was and discovered that he died in October of 2020. And I have to be honest with you, my heart's still sad about those news. You see, I am a 6'5", hyperactive extrovert. I couldn't move quietly into a room if I tried. I mean, and I could be quiet and walk into a room, and there is something about my aura that grabs all the attention. My presence fills a room, and I don't know how to change it without hating myself, and I will not hate myself for anyone, and not even God. When I was directing the camp in Iowa, one of my board members kept on going, these meetings would be shorter if Eric would quit talking. And I was open to correcting this, so I asked another board member, I said, would you do me a favor? Would you just over the course of the next meetings, I want you to mark every time I talk, and I want you to mark how long I talk. It was interesting because the board member not only did that for me, he did that for every board member, so we could kind of see who was not sharing in the group. And after 6 meetings, he reported to me that I spoke on average 5 minutes a meeting in a 75-minute meeting. And that was a collection over 10 times of speaking. But the perception was there that I was controlling the conversation. And I was actually speaking the least out of all the people in the room, but that perception remained that I dominated the conversation. That is what Pastor Hanwerk was trying to tell me. Today's reading opens with these instructions. Humble yourselves under God's power so that God may raise you up in that last day. At face value, a Christian would hear these words and agree with Gene Hanwerk. Humble people are quiet, they're unassuming, they're the last in line, they lift up others, and they seek out the place out of the limelight. And lately in my sermon preparation, when we do into a word like this, when we're going to delve into a word that has Hebrew roots, I seek out Jewish commentaries and understand, how does the Jewish world see these things? What did the prophet Micah intend when he wrote, "Walk humbly with God"? Because while today's reading is in the New Testament, this is very much rooted in the Hebrew understanding of humility. So, and this is kind of like geeky church facts that you might bore you, but you need to know. Okay? The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. And when the New Testament, even as Hebrew moved into a Greek-speaking world, they started translating the Hebrew into Greek. And when the early Christian community was being born, all the New Testament scriptures were also written in Greek. So then, when Rome becomes, or Christianity becomes the official religion of Rome, they convert all the language of the Bible into Latin. And from 400 CE to 1600 CE, Latin is the only language the Bible is written in the Christian world. And it isn't until the time of the Reformation that people start writing it in English and German and different languages. And the issue is, every time you translate from one language into the next, you lose something of the original intent, so that you do have to go back and look at what those words mean. And this is important because the Latin word for humility is humilus, which means meekness or lowliness. But the Hebrew word for humility is anava, and anava means to respond. It has nothing to do with meekness and lowliness. To Jewish scholars, humility, to walk humbly with God, or to humble yourself under God's power, is about how you respond to God with your whole self. Moses is even called by the Hebrew people the most humblest man on earth, because while he was aware of the amazing things he was able to accomplish, Moses always knew and acknowledged his virtues, his achievements were divine actions and gifts. It was not Moses doing, but God doing great things through Moses. And the rabbis would say, if you asked Moses, Moses would say, somebody could have done it better than I did, but God chose me and worked through me. I love this saying by a writing by Rabbi Mendel Kalmanson. He said, the truly humble person recognizes the whole of who they are, including their abilities and their achievements, not just their shortcomings. However, they don't take credit for their qualities and accomplishments. They know that all creativity, all ingenuity and insight come through us, not from us. But the most beautiful line of all was from this 18th century Hasidic master, Ar Simcha Bunim. And he wrote this, he defined humility this way, and I found it amazingly powerful. Humility is this: the day you were born is the day God decided that the whole world could not exist without you. And yet, each one of us is just one small piece of an infinitely complex and grand design. In this definition, arrogance and exaggerated sense of meekness are both violations, because they are self-centered way of living. And seeing yourself as worthless, it's not humility, it's an act of ingratitude. You, whoever you are, you have gifts. Those gifts you were given at birth, and the world may not see them as gifts, but you know you've been given them. And the universe cannot exist without you and the gifts you bring to the table. But God is also asking you to respond, to use those gifts. To walk humbly with God, or to humble yourself under God, is to ask yourself, how am I using the divine gifts that have been given to me? I like one of the references in this article I read. They've referred to an American author, Leo Buscaglia. And Leo wrote, your talent is God's gift to you. What you do with it is your gift back to God. I like that. My sense of humor is God's gift to me. Not everyone sees it that way all the time. How I use it is my gift back to God. See, humor really is critical for managing stress. The positive effects of humor and laughter on the heart are not just an idea, they're proven over and over again. My laughter is not because I take the world less seriously. My problem is I take things too seriously. And my laughter helps me manage things so I just don't explode in grief or in anxiety. Laughter helps me manage my own anxiety, and I use it to help others with theirs. I use laughter to make sure when people volunteer to serve on a committee that they enjoy the experience. Humor makes serving on Advent staff more enjoyable, whether it is mine or directed at me. I'm okay with it because we want our staff to be filled with the joy of the Lord. Joking with a part-time youth pastor who is experiencing high levels of stress at his main job is a way of ministering and giving relief. How shall I live? How shall I live? When I got out of seminary, Peggy cross-stitched this for me and gave it to me, and it is hung over the door of my office every day. And after reading this article, it was really helpful to understand these are my gifts, and I'm walking humbly with the gifts that I've been given, but I'm using those gifts to have a difference on the world. And that's what I want you to do as well. How shall I live is a question I'm going to present to you, the people of Advent, and I invite you to walk humbly with your God in doing it. What are your talents and your gifts, and how are you using them to serve the world? And this is not a guilt trip that I want to pass on, but an invitation to discover the depth, meaning, and joy of life. I want you to consider the words of the theologian Frederick Buechner. Your vocation in life is where your greatest talent and joy meets the world's greatest need. That is your invitation to walk humbly with God and to walk in faith. Amen.